everyone, and a very warm welcome to this exclusive fireside chat. I'm your host, Esther Martinez, CEO and Editor-in-Chief at People Matters, and it's a privilege to welcome you all for this conversation. What we're going to be experiencing today is part of a whole week initiative that we have designed for you under the theme Building a Skill-First Organization. This initiative is brought to you in partnership with Skillsoft, and we aim to help organizations reflect on the change that's underway and define strategic practices that can actually help you thrive in that transformation. So what we've seen in speaking to many of you, what we've realized is that really cultivating this workforce proficiency is really challenging, not just because it forces us to look at technical abilities, but also it requires us to focus on the softer skills like creativity, collaboration, leadership. So all of that is complex. Now, further to that, we have the rise of automation, AI, and the requirement of balancing not only tech skills, but also human skills. So in order to learn on how we may do that better, we've designed these initiatives, People Matters and Skillsoft Week, to be able to go in depth into some of these essential elements of building a forward-thinking, skill-first organization. So to focus on this conversation today, we have the privilege to have two business leaders from Skillsoft who work with multiple organizations across the world, not only bringing their expertise, but also bringing the experience of working with many companies like yourselves. So we have our first panelist for today is Mark Onisk, Chief Content Officer at Skillsoft. Very warm welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Esther. I'm glad to be here. I'm really excited and looking forward to this topic.
Looking forward as well. And a little brief about Mark. He's an EdTech executive who brings the ability to bring that vision, not only to connect multiple stakeholders like employees, clients, and investors, but really about taking that vision into scale and being able to bring those learning outcomes and those business outcomes actually to that vision. So it's a privilege to have you with us, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us. And joining us as well, we have Lina Rene, Vice President Coaching at Skillsoft. Very warm welcome, Rina.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much, Lina, for joining us. And a little brief about Lina. She brings tremendous experience as a consultant and a facilitator. She has worked with senior executives from Fortune 500, two small businesses as well, improving the customer experience, culture, and leadership capability to drive business outcomes. So thank you once again, Lina, for joining us. So I'm going to start with an open question to both of you, because as you know, the full week is going to be focusing on building skill-first organizations. And I know that this is something that you have seen organizations struggle, and it's not easy to shift from the traditional job role approach to a skill-first approach. So we'd love to invite you, and maybe Lina, you can start. Why is it so challenging? Why are we struggling so much? And what are some of the things that you have seen organizations that are a little bit ahead of the curve are getting right? What can we learn from them?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Esther. And I think you're exactly right. This is easy to talk about, and there's a lot of conversation about skills-first organizations, and it is not as easy to do. So when we see organizations that are successful in this, there's a couple of best practices. One is acknowledging that it's challenging and diving right in. You need to set time and create thought, but also to really rely on experts. Find people who have done this before. It's one of the reasons why we partner with so many organizations. It's hard to navigate something you don't know. So that's one best practice, is just to make sure that you've got expertise around you as you develop this.
Thank you so much, Lina, for that. So we have the acknowledgement that it's tough, and also along with it, almost in a way, comes the seek for help, right? In a way. So Mark, could you share some again, additional best practices you've seen organizations who are getting it right? And I don't know if there's any company you have experienced that actually has got it fully right. If so, please let us know.
Yeah.
But what has been the right trajectory that you've seen companies?
Right. Well, I think many organizations are very much on a skills-based journey in a lot of ways, and they're at varying degrees of maturity. But I think the one thing that's universal for organizations that get it right is that they connect skills to opportunity. And I know that's very much kind of a 50,000-foot platitude, but I think specifically, as they encourage learning and skill development and their workforces, either internal or external, acquire those skills, they're able to post for jobs, pursue career paths and other opportunities that help validate those skills. And I think organizations that do it well are really focused on connecting that skilling, that learning with opportunity. They're also being very willing to have more progressive kind of skills-based views on the entire talent life cycle, even going beyond learning, and actually rethinking like how they think about things like education requirements and experience levels, and can they get skills-based equivalents of those? And that's generally what the market leaders are doing in this space.
Super, super. And I'm going to come to you, Mark, again on this point, because I think it's really hitting the nail on the head. How are you able to connect the whole life cycle? And I'm going to specifically ask you in a bit, but because both of you touched upon the need to make the change, I'm curious to know, how is this different in today's context? We were in the introduction talking about different business priorities, Gen AI coming, the different pressures that different industries are facing at this moment. Why is this more urgent than ever before? And how is that changing the way we look at learning? Mark, if you want to I'll stay with you and then I'll come to you, Lina.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think it's most important today. I mean, we're, and it's hard to kind of really sense it, but we're in a fairly unique moment in history and unique moment in time. I mean, we've actually just come out of a global pandemic, which has been probably the most transformative event that most of us have ever experienced in our lifetime. We've got a new generation of leaders that have come into the space, many of whom have never had any type of professional leadership training. They're leading remote and virtual teams in a world that now has massive amounts of disruption, whether by generative AI or new technologies. They're leading, like I said, co-located teams or teams that are actually, hybrid and virtual. And there's also paired with, economic volatility and uncertainty. So in a lot of ways, this is one of the most, uncertain times to be leading in business. And that's why getting the skills intention, the skills strategy is so important right now, because we really need to understand the skills that people are at today so we can meet them where we are, and more important, build them to the personas and profiles that we need them to be the leaders and the folks that actually drive business in the future.
Yeah, wonderful. I love that, Mark, because I think in a way this economic volatility and uncertainty and the context that you're defining can actually be an opportunity if you're able to actually use it to your advantage. And I'm going to invite Lina to connect it actually with what does that skill strategy looks like. So Mark is inviting us to think about, am I able to define a skill strategy that actually enables me to take advantage of this context? What does that look like in terms of, if you were to look at success of learning, both from a business perspective and also from a learner perspective?
Yeah, maybe just even underscoring what Mark said about this emphasis on disruption. We're doing things we haven't done before, and there is an urgency to getting to the outcome factor, right? So it's not just nice to have. This is about real business pressure. It's about real business outcomes. And so much of that comes down to the personal and the interpersonal skills. Of course, the technical skills are critical. Of course, we have to identify what those skills are, tie those to the roles and the opportunities, the way that Mark said. But the personal and the interpersonal skills are that much more important. And candidly, they're a little bit more difficult to nail down when you're talking about a skill strategy. It's, if you know that it's a technical skill, you can talk about the specifics, right? This exact software, this exact coding. But when you're talking about leadership, some of this can feel a little elusive to people. On the other hand, we know what it takes to build good leadership. Some of that's intuitive. There are specific things your leaders need to be able to do to lead through change, to lead through volatility, and making sure that those skills are identified, they're measurable, you're using metrics on those, you're leveraging AI on those, becomes that much more critical in your strategy for learning.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lina. Now, when we are, as learning professionals, many of the listeners today in this fireside chat are learning professionals or HR leaders or leaders from the business side who are actually really trying to design or co-partner with their people departments to create the skill strategy. So, Mark, what would be your advice when it comes to designing those strategies for holistic success? And what would be some of the metrics that you think are important, both again from a business perspective and from a learner perspective?
Well, I think the first thing is to really consider a complete skill profile, like what's comprehensive. But we find that sometimes organizations will over-index on purely the technology persona or tech skills, or maybe even purely like the leadership skills, or in some cases are just focused on managing risk and even compliance in some way, shape, or form. And I think as organizations think about skilling, like any business challenge is always going to be a function of the technical skills that you need just to do the work that you need to transform, the leadership skills that are required to help people become the best versions of themselves, the most successful in those roles in the context of that technology. And then certainly the regulations, the risks, the governance that you have to operate within. And so I just encourage organizations to really think about that, because that's actually what delivers value across the enterprise, and that you can actually point to kind of a skilling coefficient as a part of that actually at least can be more readily equated to something that benefits shareholders, that benefits the stakeholders of the company. As an individual, that's really attractive because you're actually developing a much more complete skill set. Not only are you building the technical skills, but you're also building the leadership skills and the maturity that you need to advance in your career. So it actually has both benefits and both outcomes. So I would just always encourage organizations to have a very complete and comprehensive view of skilling. All too often we approached, any type of skill transformation as just a moment in time, and we just need this one thing. We really need to think about it as a cycle and a journey, and how to promote the maturation of the workforce so that we can achieve kind of long-term shareholder and stakeholder value.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that, Mark. And I'm wondering, and I'd love to invite you, Lina, to comment on that. How do you see the advancements of AI enabling that better personalization of learning? And not just on the technical side, because I think that's maybe a little bit easier to put your arms around it, but especially on the softer skills that you spoke about, the interpersonal, the leadership, some of those ones that are a little more elusive, and I really love the word you use. How is AI helping us be making those experiences, learning experiences, more personalized?
Yeah, we are entering such an uncharted territory around AI, but what we do know is that it will be disruptive for many roles, for many skills. And I think we can be optimistic about the way that it's disruptive. I think there's enormous opportunity that's coming at us as we're looking at learning and development, leadership development. One, AI should be considered in terms of how we create more efficiency and effectiveness in the roles themselves. So how are we leveraging AI to become better at what we do? And there are enormous benefits to leveraging AI in our actual development capabilities. So this is an area where we can proudly say that Skillsoft has really led out, right? We launched an AI interactive conversational simulator so that you can actually practice some of these behaviors that you're trying to incorporate. That's one of the challenges anytime we're looking at shifting behaviors. You don't get better by learning alone. You don't get better by application alone. You only change behavior when you get to do it over and over and over again. And AI all of a sudden creates this safe space where you can practice things, become even evaluated, even scored on how you're doing, get coaching from the AI. So I think that's one example where AI has tremendous power and potential. And if it's okay, I'd love to invite Mark to contribute what he thinks here as well, because I know this is something he's really passionate about and knowledgeable about.
Yeah, well, I think the way that AI is enabling personalization is just by the sheer fact that you can actually have conversations with technology now at scale in a world where just a few short years ago that was very impractical or difficult. And for so many years, and certainly learning isn't alone in this case. Like even any type of multiplayer, to a certain extent, a multiplayer or first-person simulator game, if it dealt or contemplated any type of kind of cognitive or kind of social interaction, you always got to a moment in that game where you would be presented with three choices, kind of A, B, or C, and you pick a choice and you get a certain score and you kind of advance. The challenge is that the human brain doesn't think that way. We generally don't go, like, I don't get to a point in this discussion when Lena asks me a question. I don't have three choices that come up in my mental mind, and I have a virtual mouse that actually is selecting one and I'm getting points for it. I'm forming language and speech patterns. I'm gathering reactions. I'm using that stimuli to actually adjust my speech and how I deliver things. And, I think with the advancements in generative AI, the ability to kind of manage and understand language, the ability to kind of understand that sentiment and measure that, and then actually have conversations that actually mimic real life in a very, highly kind of scaled and very practical manner is a complete game changer. For years, we've actually focused on delivering content and instruction in the context of video because it was the easiest thing to kind of record and capture in mass. I think with kind of the advent of generative AI that, as Lena described, we have a product we call the Conversation AI Simulator, Casey. We think that those types of conversational experiences are going to be increasingly the norm, and that's really going to fuel the next generation of education technology, not only in the corporate spaces, we think about learning overall. So we're really excited about that future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Anything else on any advancement on technology? Because I want to move forward, Mark, on what you were referring in the beginning, on how do we make sure that skills are connected to opportunities. But before I go there, I would love to just capture anything that we can on how AI is helping organizations really, really create higher value. If there's any other example that you may want to share before we move forward, because
and it's certainly a more conventional approach and use of AI is more of the predictive capabilities. And I think the predictive models that are being used, I mean, we have products around skill benchmarks and skill assessments. We think that the level of analytics and insights that we get from that skilling information can really provide a clear kind of pre and post a set of career outcomes and steps to take to actually close those skills gaps, both at an individual level, formative recommendations, and even at an enterprise level, as you kind of see that trajectory unfold. And we think that, that level of kind of analytical insight, how organizations are using that type of data at scale, and the ability to use, traditional kind of predictive analytics to make those recommendations is only getting more precise. It's getting more accurate, and our ability to do those things at scale, again, is just creating more value in the learning experience. And I think you're going to see that again continue to grow and flourish in the future.
And I have one thought around how we combine kind of the human element with AI, right? So I oversee our coaching division. We do a lot of coaching, one-on-one coaching. And I'll just say, I think everyone agrees that AI is not going to replace humans. It's not Terminator coming at us. And yet there's a real opportunity to weave in that human touch point with AI. In fact, coming right on the horizon is the ability for generative AI to act like a true coach, to ask coaching questions, to prompt thought, to help you develop yourself. And yet, how does that play out with my actual coach as well? I mean, we believe that you leverage the power of both to create a very personalized, very in the flow of work, being able to develop myself and take ownership of that. And that is facilitated by combining both the human touch point and the generative AI future.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks, Lena and Mark. And this is great examples. And I'm going to invite you to continue with those examples as I try to pick up what we started on the first question about how do we shift to skill-first organizations. And Mark, you referred to skills to how do we connect skills to opportunity? And you also referred to creating a complete talent life cycle. So, Lena, maybe you pick it up first, and then Mark, you can add. How are organizations actually being able to do that? How are they able to connect the learning to actually talent mobility, career progression, growth? Because finally, that's where the rubber hits the road in a way. So if you could share how you've seen some of successful clients you work with being able to do that.
Yeah, I think part of this is simply awareness. We know that learning has an impact, development has an impact, but you have to follow that thread too. But what does it lead to? It's not just did we complete courses? It's what's the impact of that? So part of it's just an awareness that you have to think beyond it. If your only data and dashboards are usage, okay, that's one point to think of. But if we're not considering how does that impact the individual's career progression, do we have opportunity for them that waits on the other side when they invest in themselves and when we invest in them? And then even further to that, how does that career progression impact the business? Because look, it's people do all the work. It's all about people. No matter how much we have in terms of AI, machinery, robotics, in the end, it's still a person that programs the robotics. It's still a person. So it's investing in our people, but it's investing them in a way that we know contributes to the priorities of the business. So tracking what is if I'm a learning and development professional and I don't know what the business priorities are, I probably need to step back and make sure that's in my mind. What are the key metrics that the CEO cares about? What are the key metrics that the division leaders are tracking? And then making sure that I'm backing into that with my learning and development initiatives and my talent life cycle management as well. Maybe Mark, I'm sure you have additional thoughts here. Can I pass it over to you?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said before in kind of my opening comments, the companies and the organizations that do this well, they connect learning and skills with opportunities. And I think, the real kind of manifestations of that, when you think about the HR life cycle, inclusive of like onboarding, recruiting, total rewards, performance, succession planning, skills are becoming the way or the ultimate way in which all those things are kind of, synchronized and actually brought in line with one another. With skills actually being the atomic unit of mass that actually enables that entire progression. So again, I think what starts to become really powerful is when you are leveraging the credentials, the badges, the completions, the things that the scores that people get on the digital learning experiences, their skill acquisition, and those can actually be ported into your career marketplaces and employee experience platforms. And I know that seems like, oh my, that's the stuff of science fiction. That's a lot, the architecture has to go into it. But we work with organizations every day that are doing just that. And in some cases, they're using very simple and maybe, not massively technically advanced ways to do it. But they are taking like the badges, the transcripts and things that are actually earned in their learning platforms like a Percipio, and they're making that discoverable and importable into their career marketplaces, and they're actually assigning value to it. And I think what better message to send your workforce other than to say, hey, if you actually complete these 3 or 4 courses, if you complete this pathway, this journey, if you seek help from a coach, you're going to qualify for this number of opportunities, these types of jobs. And maybe they're not full-time jobs, maybe they're gigs, maybe they're opportunities, in the marketplace, in your internal marketplace, or even assignments. But that just leans into the value that you're putting on learning as a company. Versus if you're an organization that just has learning in isolation, does not connect it to career progression, it's going to be very hard to ever convince your workforce to take it seriously. And it's going to be even harder to have your managers and leaders get behind that experience because they don't see any value in it either. So again, I know I'm kind of overemphasizing, kind of doubling down on my initial statements, but I think the ability to kind of link that into your career marketplaces and your career progression is incredibly important as you think about talent mobility. So I just encourage organizations to leverage the technology and methodologies to do that.
Super. Thank you so much yeah, go ahead, Lina.
I just was going to add, I think in some ways that is what the shift of this whole skills-based initiative is. I mean, the entire industry is talking about, instead of competencies like it was a decade ago, of course, those are still important, but now we want to drill this down to skills. And in some ways, what Mark was talking about is what's driving that entire shift. It's this need to be able to identify capability in a really tangible way, and then create an organization that matches that with the opportunity. And I will say, even learners want to know this. Individual employees want to know this. It's not just that leadership or L&D or HR cares about this, but when I enter an organization, I want to know, what's my opportunity here? That's becoming increasingly important as we see Gen Z enter the workforce as well. They want career progression. They want to know what they can get when they invest in themselves or when the organization invests in them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for both of you. I could stay with you for the rest of the afternoon, but I want to make sure we have enough time for one question, which in my view kind of wraps around this whole possibility. And Mark, you were talking about skills being the atomic unit. I think in many ways, culture or leadership is the air or the oxygen, right? None of this will actually happen unless we're able to wrap around the right habits, the right rituals, the right culture, the right intangible part of it. So, and I know this is very close to both of your hearts. So, Lina, what would be one thing you'll invite us to start and stop when it comes to cultivating a culture that actually enables this investment in learning, connection with the talent pipeline, connection with what's in it for me as a business, what's in it for me as an individual, and makes it happen?
Well, I agree with you that we could spend all afternoon talking about this. And Esther, such great questions you're asking. So I do think being able to cultivate a culture, and culture defines everything. Culture is how each person shows up to work every day. And so creating a culture that prioritizes growth and learning, I really think that does begin with leaders. So in terms of start or stop, if we've got HR, L&D professionals listening, I think, again, this is about the leaders in your organization. So start getting time with them. Ensure that every leader is able to support and commit to a culture of growth. I was with a Fortune 50 company last week, and I was meeting with the CEO. I mean, this is a CEO that oversees hundreds of thousands of employees. And what he wanted to talk about was the capability and investing in his people in this exact way. That is a culture of learning. And then I got to meet with down to individual contributors and how they felt supported in that organization, again, all the way up to the CEO. So if you're L&D or HR, get time with your leaders, ensure that they understand the priority. If you are a leader listening to this or watching this, in your case, it's critical that you build space for your employees and those that report to you to do this. I was talking to one CTO last week, and she said they have a learning hour on their calendar, every person on her team. She has hundreds of people in her division. There's a learning hour, and the expectation is that they use that hour for learning. And so it's these simple things that we do as leaders to create a culture of learning. So I'm doubling down on the leader component of this.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lina, for sharing. Mark, what will be your start and stop?
Yeah, I think number one to start, I think I would encourage all learning leaders, again, be an ambassador of skills in your organization. And I think it's important as a part of that role to really help people think about how skills impact all the other HR processes, right? So think about how would we do recruiting differently? How would we write job profiles and job descriptions differently? You know, do we have the institutional organizational courage to walk away from traditional education requirements and experiential requirements and go to skill profiles? Do we believe what would stand in the way of actually setting total rewards based on skill profiles, right? And you find after you actually go after and really look at and cross-examine these like heritage people operation processes that always you were indexed on, you know, things that were very much backward looking in terms of someone's education they got in some cases more than a decade ago. When it looks at the experience that they once had in an industry that may not even exist anymore, you start to actually get to a much more open space where skills become more ubiquitous and they become the instrument in which the entire company can start indexing the entire performance of its workforce around. The thing I would encourage learning professionals to stop doing is obsessing about launches and utilization and whether or not we've got, you know, how many learners come into the platform. That's important. That's important. But you're usually measuring like a third or fourth level artifact of something much more important that comes before that, of how you're actually promoting the learning culture to begin with. So in many ways, that's a lag indicator. And I will say, just in my observation, you know, it seems like the learning function and learning practice, like this concept of adoption and utilization, like that lens is placed more on this work and commercial process more than any other commercial process in the, you know, in any other business. Like no one sits and thinks, okay, well, how many people actually accessed like our Salesforce automation tool this month, and where you're maybe planning kind of and managing kind of your CRM and so forth, right? no one really measures like how often are we actually using this email thing after all, and how many emails did we send in a given day, and is that number of email volume, is that really worth it? And it's kind of strange as those types of arguments seem in the context of those enterprise applications. I see learning leaders every day having the same types of discussions around learning as a process. And so again, I would get away from traditional kind of launches and adoption and how many people used it or visited the site. And let's get back to a discussion of like skills and how many skills did we actually generate and what were the value of those skills? And are we doing that at scale? And are we actually promoting career mobility and career progression? And is there evidence of that in our platforms? And is there evidence of that, within the workforce? And if there's not, are we willing to have the really difficult conversations to make it reality? And I think that's a much more productive space for learning leaders to be in.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mark, for giving us this wake up in a way that we're still living in those heritage. You call it heritage people operations. And thank you, Lena, for giving us these really practical things that we can implement almost immediately, actually. So that takes us to the end of our conversation. Is there anything else that you wish I would have asked? And you're like, oh, I really wanted to share this before we close?
I think you did a brilliant job at covering the topics and giving us an opportunity to share our thoughts. Thank you, Esther.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Lena. Go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
Likewise. No, it was a very fulsome discussion, and we're thrilled to be able to participate in it. So again, I know that our contact details will be made available through LinkedIn and other platforms. We're happy to always connect and share points of view. Feel free to visit skillsoft.com if you have any additional questions.
So thank you very much. I couldn't think of a better session and a better expertise that both of you brought to us today. So really, really thank you and gratitude for being part of our session today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And for all of you, thank you for joining us, whether you're seeing these on day one or you see these later. Remember, this is only the beginning. We're still actually on day two, my apologies. And we're going to have multiple series of conversations that are going to be lined up throughout the week. And we're going to have an opportunity to hold your hand as we go through this journey of skill-first organization. So once again, thank you for joining us and looking forward to seeing you in the rest of the week. Have a wonderful day ahead.